And good afternoon. It's once again Friday, 12 o'clock. We know where we are. It's our Lunch and Learn session at the Dutch Mentor. As promised, this week we're going to bring an outside guest all the way by UK, or really originally from Austria. I happened to meet her a couple of weeks ago in the lunchroom, had a great chat. That was so easy that I said, listen, I think this is something of great value to the students, to the people who are on the Dutch Mentor membership, to kind of get a different perspective. So without any further ado, and Bettina will introduce herself and give a little background. Take it away, and I hope everybody enjoys the talk.
Thank you, Walter. And I realize you tried to avoid pronouncing my name.
You are correct, ma'am. Andresen, I can handle.
Andresen Guimaraes, and I'm not even an expert. It's my Portuguese husband name, so yeah, I'm not an expert, but you didn't say it, I realized. Bettina Andresen Guimaraes. I'm Austrian, as Walter said. I have been living in Paris for a few years, and since 2015, I'm now in the UK, and where I work as an intercultural coach and work with people on international teams, going abroad, preparing them for their expatriation. And I'm fascinated by the topic culture or interculturality. And if I invent words, just go with it, heavens. Since I have been living in France, it wasn't so much of an issue when I worked with the French culture before that, but I really realized how different it is when you are the foreigner in another country. And I absolutely love the topic, and I hope you're interested in it too. I tried to listen to what Walter told me about the audience. So I tried to give my topic a little bit of a touch that is health direction, with an example that goes into the health area, and also on leadership, because I know that is Walter's big topic that you work on with him. And I will do so in connection with culture or with different cultures. Because everything, whatever we look at in life, it will be our culture that influences how we see things, how we categorize things, how we even judge them, and of course, how we communicate with others, right? So globalizing your leadership skills is really about raising awareness and about giving you a tiny, tiny roadmap, whatever is possible in the 25 minutes that we have together, to give you an idea of where to look, not exactly what to see, but where to look, and maybe research more. And then you could maybe sharpen your senses when it comes to different cultures, when you encounter different people in your work, be it colleagues, suppliers, patients, right? We live in a globalized world. So this is the aim of today's talk, and really a heartily welcome to all of you. I'm happy to do that. And thank you, Walter, for having me do that.
You're welcome. Happy to have you.
Let me kick the topic up off with a question, and just note it down for you so that you get a clarity, get an awareness how you are ticking, right? What comes to your mind when you think of breakfast? Just the word breakfast. What comes to your mind? What do you imagine? What can you suddenly maybe even smell or taste?
Eggs and bacon.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Yeah, okay. Maybe we have a different outcome for the other participants. Let's see. We can also exchange in the end. And I come back to that in a minute as well, right? But I would like to share with you this quote. Every human is like all other humans, some other humans, and no other human. And this is one of the challenges when it comes to intercultural dealings, right? Because we never know what is actually the case. And what does it really mean? So you see here, the American Kluckhorn, he has based this, this quote on his experience from anthropology. And then we see the three levels here of uniqueness, the three levels of uniqueness in mental programming that show us how this quote can be interpreted, right? So you have human nature at the bottom, and human nature includes all the traits that are universal and also all the traits that are inherited. And the second level would be culture, and culture is specific to a group category. But this group can be nationality, this group can be a tribe, a community. It can even be a corporate culture, right? Your organization has their own specific culture, and culture is learned. That's the nurture part of us, not the nature part. And then on top of this pyramid, you see personality, and personality is specific for every individual, right? It is as well inherited and it is learned. So for example, I have a twin sister. Is it an identical twin? Yes, it is. Are we identical? No, we're not. So every human is like all other humans, some other humans, and no other human. And coming back to the question I asked before, you have here an illustration of what breakfast could look like across the globe, right? And thinking of the 3 levels of uniqueness that we just saw, we will find them all here. We have nature, because we all have to eat, right? We have culture. Our breakfast will probably not depend on, but most likely be influenced by how we have been brought up or in which region we live in now. And then you have personality. We can change it to our taste if the region doesn't give us what we want. So let's pause here for a second. I gave you one word, and that one word was breakfast. And with that one simple word, you had a whole sensory world opening up to you, right? You could maybe see what you eat. You could smell it. You could taste it. You could feel it, maybe the crunch of your toast, right? And you could hear the crunch of your toast. Everything came, all the senses were covered by the word breakfast. And this is a very simple, non-controversial word. Now let me give you another one. Trust, leadership, communication. And what they mean to you, think about it, and what they could possibly mean to the person next to you. Will it be exactly the same, or have you a complete different context, meaning for it? Just when I say trust or leadership or communication. So I think having awareness that these differences exist and that they are there in an instant, if someone gives you the word, is the first step for us to approach the other, and can be a very positive step, right? And in intercultural communication or interaction, awareness is the entry key, the entry ticket to successful communication. So I mentioned before that I wanted to give you a little roadmap, and I will give you this roadmap in the form of some key concepts of interculturality, right? So as I said before, they will tell you where to look, not exactly what to see, because that actually at the end of the day is our responsibility to fill it with that interpretation, but you will get some patterns, okay? So let's look at them together. We have here the concepts of time, space, and context, and they have been developed again by an American anthropologist, by Edward Hall, in the 1950s of the last century. 1950s is last century. And Edward Hall is considered by a lot of people to be the founder, the inventor, if you want, of intercultural communication as an academic discipline. So the concept of time, for example, would give us indications about the different notions of time that we have in different regions of the world. The concept of space gives us an idea of how we all perceive distance in a different way. And the concept of context tells us, and that's the most tricky one actually, how much explicit information is included in the way we talk or not. Starting with time, we have cultures that are monochronic and those that are polychronic. And in monochronic cultures, events are scheduled one at a time. So you have a linear concept with hours, with minutes, with seconds, and everything happens one after the other. And then in polychronic cultures, many things occur simultaneously. And we can say also that schedules are not so important, they are secondary. And when I show you this line, you have an example of several countries here in relation to each other, whether they are more monochronic or polychronic. I can't see it actually now because I have the pictures, but it doesn't matter. On the right side, I know there is India. So imagine the Indian, looking at the French culture, they might probably perceive them as overly punctual, always in time, very aware of time frames, etc. Whereas when a German looks at the French, they might say, no, they never keep deadlines, right? This is called cultural relativity, because it depends on where we stand on that line and where we turn towards another culture that might be so different from ours. And to give you a little bit of an overview how monochronic and polychronic cultures differ from each other. So it's all about deadlines and schedules, how we plan things. It's also about task orientation or relationship orientation, how we focus on the job on hand. And as I said in the beginning, I think the recording wasn't on then, the language shows the cultural significance of time. We say wasted time, time is money, etc. It's so important, it's even expressed in our language. When I show you all these things, I really invite you to not see them in black and white, because someone who is monochronic can still multitask, right, Walter? Even men.
Although it's discouraged to multitasking, inefficient.
Just joke. But there are so many gray areas, but see it really as that pattern that might help you to orientate yourself in that field of intercultural communication, right? Because just as well as no one will come up to you and say, hey, I'm an introvert and my preferred communication or working style is XY. No one will come up to you and say, hey, I'm monochronic, so can you please be in time? But this is something that we can easily observe, that we can look at and really get an idea of how people prefer to see time. And maybe then have it will still be a hypothesis, but we can ask, right? How they like to work and how they plan, how they schedule things. Because it's important when we work with each other, and we might have a different view of those things. Okay. And as with awareness, I said in the beginning, awareness is the most important thing, but we always have to start with ourselves. So my question is, again, how do you see yourself? Do you see yourself rather monochronic, and I really insist on the word rather? Or do you see yourself a little bit polychronic and you're able to deal with a lot of things in the same time, and you're not cross if someone's 10 minutes late, for example? Think about these things for yourself. So the next key concept is called space, and it gives us an indication about our preference when it comes to personal space, and also when it comes to territorial behavior. And we distinguish between non-contact and contact cultures. So those who do like contact, who do like physical touch, who get closer to each other, and those cultures who have a need for greater space, be that in conversations, distance when they talk to people, in their workplace. It's expressed in the size of homes. Compare Japan to the US. It might be a question of available territory as well, of course. But then this is how the culture then grows and translates that into a lot of other areas of their life. Okay. And then there is also this distinction between territorial behavior. So for example, when I moved from France to the UK, I realized that there are fences everywhere in the UK. So it is on the non-contact culture side, and they have a high territorial behavior. You have fences everywhere that are around houses that you can't see through. You have bushes alongside the country roads so that you can't see the fields behind them. This was very new for me, but it gives me an indication how people see their things, how people see their property, etc. And also I realized that people would never park in front of someone else's house, even if it was not technically the property of the neighbor. So I don't do it because I want to have a good relationship with my neighbors. So this is how I then navigate and say, okay, how do I have to behave in the culture I live in? What clue does that give me? What the rules of space also dictate is the way we greet each other. And it can look like this, or it can look like this. In a business context, of course, yeah? Or, and this is actually my favorite picture, it can also, in our globalized world, look like this, where both sides have already learned about each other's preferences and make an effort to do actually what the other one wants, right? And I really hope these two gentlemen here, they laughed it off, and it was already the icebreaker for their intercultural encounter and a good business meeting then. Again, how would you describe yourself? Do you describe yourself as a contact person or a non-contact person? And I invite you to think about how you like to be greeted. Pre-COVID, that is, because I think things have changed a lot. But how was it pre-COVID? How did you hug? Did you kiss people? How close was it when you had a business meeting? Even then, there are differences. How close can people come in a conversation and you're still comfortable with the distance, or do you step back because you're so uncomfortable with them coming closer? Some people walk the whole room like that. Whether you're rather touchy or not so much. Just think about it and get a feeling for how you would like to be greeted, how close you would come, and how it could differ with the people you meet every day. The third concept is called context, and it's the most tricky one, as I said before. It is about differences in communication. So high context cultures, we call them high context cultures, give background information implicitly. The information is included more in the way how things are said than in the way what is said, or if it's said at all, because there is a lot of pause in those cultures as well, rather than in the low context cultures. When you're familiar with a high context culture, you can navigate it easily because you get the hints and tips and clues. When we're not from a high context culture, and different high context cultures are not the same, so between them there can be misunderstandings as well, then we have to apply a little bit of low context manner, I would say, in order to understand. So we have to ask, we have to find out what we want to know. And I'll give you an example in a minute. And low context cultures, they are explicit. They say clearly what they mean. They are very direct, and it's not regarded as an offense. Because what you see here is, again, the difference between the two cultures. Implicit message is high context, explicit in low context. Also how emotion is shown. So the high context cultures have more reserved reactions, more inward reactions. Think of Japan. Normally people don't even show their emotions with their facial expressions. I'm not saying one is good and one is bad. It is just what it is. And navigating it is difficult if we are used to something else, right? In the US, you probably show visible, external, outward reactions, right? You say what you mean. You show your joy. And then what is interesting as well, look at the last point of this slide. Good communication and how it is considered to be. High context cultures consider good communication subtle, nuanced, discreetly hinting, I would say. And low context cultures consider it precise, simple, clear, direct. Okay. So when I give you the word good communication, again, you have an idea how good communication looks like, right? And the person next to you has a completely different idea of good communication. And then we have these misunderstandings in teams where someone says, oh, the communication is not working. We have to talk about what communication means for us and what we want it to mean, right? I give you one example between a high and low context culture as well. Imagine you suggest to a colleague something, a project, and they disagree. Coming from a low context culture like Germany or like the US as well, they can just say, thank you very much, but it's not for me. And off you go, and there are no hard feelings probably. You know what has been said, and it's clear and precise and simple. If that person comes from a high context background, you might rather get an answer along the lines of, thank you very much, I will think about it. No more. And then it is our responsibility, your responsibility, to ask if you want to get the real answer, and ask in a way that's appropriate for that specific culture, for that specific person. Does that make sense? So in a high context culture, you might not get a very explicit answer to what you're asking. Let's look at this continuum here. You have a continuum between the low context and high context cultures, and you see they are grouped by language type. So on the left side, you have the Anglo-Saxon cluster, then you have the Romance language cluster, and on the very right, you have the Asian languages. And within each cluster, you can see that there is a difference when it comes to length of history or the level of similarity that have impacted the communication style. And this is, for example, why in the Anglo-Saxon cluster, the US are much more to the left, more low context than the UK is, for example. I hear here a lot when people come back from America or go to America that this is two countries separated by the same language. Because yeah, you speak the same language, but still it doesn't mean that the whole cultural settings are the same. US is a quite young nation compared to the centuries old history of the UK. I say old history, shared history of the people living there, right? And then when you look at the Romance language cluster, Brazil has the highest diversity of this cluster. So they are relatively low context because they also need to communicate more directly. Compared to India, very low context. Compared to Australia, you will probably not be familiar with everything from the onset if you go to Brazil. And same in the Asian language cluster. Singapore has a very high cultural diversity. Same for India, also religious, and they are the lowest context in their cluster. And here I have marked the lowest context culture of the world and the highest context culture of the world. And this is the US on the low scale and Japan on the high scale. And again, it is about history. It is about the fact that Japan is an island. They had their culture and they could develop their culture without any influence from outside. And the US, on the other hand, has already been composed of so many different nations, cultures, that they had to be explicit in order to understand each other. Okay. This is not really a concept, what I'm showing you now. There are other key concepts. We can't in 25 minutes, of course, not go into everything. You have structures of societies that are important, like whether society is individualistic or more collectivist, right? You have influences of how hierarchy is seen, and we come to that in a minute as well when we look at leadership, and many other factors. However, I wanted to give values an extra chapter because I really think they are so important in every single culture. Okay, and let's look at this value, for example, FACE. You probably have heard about it. It can stand for honorableness, for righteousness, for reputation, esteem, standing. It has a whole meaning in different cultures. And the expression face is also used in a lot of different countries. Even in German, we say das Gesicht verlieren, to lose one's face and it means being embarrassed or being discovered for something you have done. It's not a good thing when you lose face. I don't know whether you say it in America as well, nod or shake, or is it not so much used in this sense? Yeah, okay. But you know what it means, right? And having said that, in how it's used in German, it does not have the same severity, the same intensity as this is the case in a lot of Asian countries, for example. And I'm specifically thinking of China. Because what happens is values will make us react differently to specific events. And at this moment, I'm thinking of this event. And I think you're so familiar with it because in your area of expertise, that must have been so present during the last 2 years, right? So talking about the values, in the very midst of the pandemic, we saw the media echo regarding China not letting the WHO into the country in order to investigate on the origin of the coronavirus. And you can see here the headlines, how they read: China blocks WHO team, etc., etc. It's all negative, right? It's all the judgment of China not letting these experts in. And in substance, when we look at the articles and also what is said, the statements are certainly true, right? However, in order to really understand where the denial to enter China could have come from, I think we really need to consider one of the biggest values in the Chinese culture, and that is face. And face in the Chinese culture stands for keeping face, for example, to say, I keep my dignity, for saving face when it comes to keeping integrity, for building face when it is about building reputation. So here with these articles, or with that balance between China and the rest of the world, is we have a dilemma of hiding something from an outside perspective versus preserving their dignity in the face of the world from an inside perspective. Now, I do appreciate also that not everyone will agree with me on that. It's the way I really see it. And I think that by looking at a culture's values, by learning to understand how a culture works and what their ways are, and trying to walk in their shoes, we do make that first step for intercultural understanding. And we might just be the better communicators because of that, right? See what I did here? Good communication. Another important value for a lot of cultures is freedom. And I would like to give you another example how this value might influence events and maybe even have had an effect on the reactions to COVID of people to them. So I again take the COVID example, and we now swift to the US side of things. You will probably agree with me that freedom is one of the most important values in the US, right? And we have here a number of articles that illustrate, if nothing else, then at least how present and relevant this value is in the US, and how it presented itself during the coronavirus pandemic, right? And here the articles, they speak about freedom over fear, about proudly flouted social distancing, etc. And compared to China, which is a collectivist country, one where the interest of the single person is not as important as the interest of the group, the US are an individualistic country, right? Where loyalty to a group is not priority, let's say it like this. Because in the US, you have self-esteem, strong ego, you have self-expression, self-realization, and other important values. And they go hand in hand with the value of freedom, meaning that you take things in your own hands and that you don't want anyone taking away your liberty, your freedom. And I don't remember having seen any articles, for example, about Chinese or Asian people in general not wanting to wear masks. Even in Austria, they have demonstrated. I mean, but it's a cultural difference. It is about protecting community, protecting the other. I mean, the Asians have done that for years, even when they just have a cold, right? So it's a different way of looking at things. And again, I'm not saying it's the only element, right? But it was one of the things that really stood out for me. And again, it's meant as food for thought for you, and the motivation maybe to look at events and how media talk about it as well from a completely different perspective, or from a little bit from another one, right? So yeah, we have now seen how the culture that we are shaped by influences our perspective of time and space, and also the communication in general. We have seen how underlying values have an effect on how we feel, how we think, how we act. And surprise, of course, culture also shapes the way we see leadership. And just with the word breakfast, you probably have an idea what leadership means when the word drops. And I give you, and again, it's a very rough and basic comparison, some examples how leadership might be seen differently because of an egalitarian culture or a hierarchical culture. Because in leadership, it's all about hierarchy and power. So we have to look at whether a culture is egalitarian or hierarchical. And already, I think it gives us a lot of hints and tips that can be seen in these different cultures. How a leader is seen, one of the team, a facilitator among our others, or the one who has to be the expert, who has to be the director, the president, with all the status symbols that come with it. Whilst in an egalitarian culture, status is not so important. It's implicit that the boss is the boss. It will make things different in the way discussions are led and in the way communication is led in general. So whether you can go across hierarchy levels or not. And again, here is a depiction of a number of countries and how they position themselves in relation to others on this line between egalitarian and hierarchical. And you might say, oh, or no, tell me if you want. You can unmute yourself. Are you surprised by the position of the US, or how do you see the position of the US on this line in comparison to other?
I'm personally not surprised, because we get still you have different age groups of leaders who might act differently. Mm-hmm. I think the new the millennials are more leaning to the left, while still the more older are leaning to the right. So being in the middle or left of center, I think is a natural place to be for the United States at this time.
It's also with all of these charts that I showed you, it's not a single position and it doesn't move. So the US might as well have a class, and US is a vast country. The North is different from the South and the West from the East, probably because you're such a big nation, right? But even in their position, it can move. And I think the more global we get, the more things will get, I noted it because I always mix it up with diluted, right? Because our cultures mix and we learn from each other. It's not only in the superficial things like greeting ceremonies, or it's in everything, in the way we. Then when I looked at that today, I thought, oh, Russia is actually quite on the left side. I would have put it much more to the right with the events that are going on at the moment. But I think culture is so moving, and it is, it's not a static thing. Culture lives, right? So yeah, 5:36. I hope I haven't used up too much of the time. I hope there was something interesting for each and every one of you in that talk. I thank you for your interest. I thank you for being here today in general. And yeah, if you want to keep in touch, here's my business card, so to speak. Go on LinkedIn if you want to have my culture glossary that I send out every Tuesday. And yeah, happy to be open for questions if you want, if we have time still, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, first, thank you. It's very insightful. We're talking about as leaders, servant leaders, to make sure that we pay attention to the individual. For us who work in New York City and surrounding areas, we often work with many, many different cultures and as many as 150 different languages spoken. And all the things you talk about today is very relevant. If you want to engage people, if you want to lead people, if you want to get the most out of people, you have to engage them in the level of their understanding and not force them into a box that they're not comfortable with. I always laugh is that, I'm Dutch. I love hugging and kissing. I'm devastated with COVID. I haven't hugged or kissed anybody as I meet them in 2 years. I feel like somebody cut my arm off. But those things are real, right? And we need to make adjustments along the way. I'm going to take it off record and end it, and then we can go to any Q&A